several new unfunded mandates each year to the capital investment needed, skyrocketing operation and maintenance cost, and you basically have an unstable financial situation. We've also looked at the old but interesting model called NEPA, which is the acronym for National Environmental Policy Act. Passed by Congress in the early 1970s, NEPA required the federal government to perform a comprehensive environmental planning review before taking any major action involving federal money or federal facilities. There are 4 stages to this type of planning. Number 1 is to make a clear statement of need. Number 2 is to identify all possible ways to meet that need, including doing nothing at all. Number 3 is evaluate the environmental and socio-economic implications of each alternative, or choose the best alternative and justify why it is the best alternative. At the local level, this approach could have certain advantages over the traditional approach. For example, if you can meet the goal of delivering 50,000 gallons of clean drinking water a day in either one of 2 ways, and one way is as certain as the other, why wouldn't you choose the less expensive way? Because of habit. And that's because it was, and it was the accepted way of doing things when the EPA gave out wastewater facility construction grants. The traditional water and wastewater DBB model has actually encouraged overpricing, but public-private partnership approaches have proven, for the most part, to deliver service at a less expensive cost. We've learned that in Schenectady as well. Are there similar arguments to be made for the underground? Are there similar arguments also to be made for underground infrastructure? In today's environment, I think you will find that mayors are more open to hearing what those arguments are, but they have to be demonstrated and they have to be proven. As co-chair of the Mayor's Water Council, I am in close contact with conference staff, including Dr. Richard Anderson, who's here this morning, and as we work to set our meetings agenda. We regularly feature these alternative models as best practices at our meetings, where other mayors attend and find problem-set solutions. I also collaborate with our staff on research agenda, and you should be aware of some of our past and recent reports. Our first national city survey, which was published in 2005, we found that the top 3 priorities in the nation are: number 1, rehabilitating an aging water infrastructure; number 2, emergency preparedness and planning for water infrastructure; and 3, water supply shortages. The second national survey, which looks almost like the first one, was published in 2007, and it was designed to elicit information on the adoption of asset management programs in public systems and more in-depth information on water and wastewater pipes. And Dr. Anderson, I believe, provided preliminary results on this survey to your annual meeting in 2007. I think that was held in Santa Barbara, another place that my auditors don't want to see me travel to. So Rich doesn't have to worry about that. In August of 2008, we published and commissioned a report on value-added investments in public water and wastewater. The consultant, the Catalyst Group, found that every dollar invested in infrastructure returns $6.3 in private output, 1-to-6 ratio. Every dollar of revenue created by the water and wastewater industry generates another $2.6 in revenue in all other industries. And every job in water and wastewater creates an additional 3.6 jobs in the national economy to support the water job. Finally, in February of this year, we published a new report that documented past public spending on water and wastewater services and infrastructure, and made several forecasts of spending over the next 20 years. We did this study because of the nagging concerns that the wave of unfunded federal mandates is getting out of control. The debate over spending on these unfunded mandates is one of the most ill-informed discussions ever held in the Washington, D.C. policy arena. I'm going to leave some of that detail of the report to Dr. Anderson. But the major findings support the notion that we are on a financially unstable path, and that change in this thinking is called for. And that leads me to the chart that's on the screen, the only slide that I have in my presentation. Our research shows that local government historically has spent $1.6 trillion, in that column over there, on public water and wastewater services and infrastructure over the 53-year period between 1956 and 2008. Our USCM staff has made 3 20-year spending forecasts for 2009 to 2028. These estimates are presented here in this table. The forecasts are admittedly crude, but they do have a strong basis in historical spending trends. The high range estimate, which is up here, is based on a growth rate of spending of 7.5% per year. This is the historical average growth rate over the years, over 53 years, 56 through 2008. This growth rate scenario suggests that local government will spend between $4.3 and $4.8 trillion over the 20-year forecast period. This should be compared to the $1.6 trillion that was spent over the last 53 years. Why is the range 4.3 to 4.8? The 4.3 trillion figure represents what local government would normally spend, and the 4.8 trillion figure represents an additional $25 billion that is related to the EPA's needs gap of $500 billion in additional capital spending over the 20-year period. It's going to be a test on this after the presentation. Our Water Council staff made this adjustment for each growth rate scenario. The low range estimate over here, the second column furthest to the right, is based on a growth rate of spending of 2.6% per year. This growth factor represents one full deviation below the average historical rate. It represents a sluggish investment scenario. So even at $2.4 trillion, it's going to be more than that. The estimate includes a range of 2.5 to 3.0 trillion. Again, over the next 20 years, even the low-range spending forecast projects that spending will far outstrip what has been spent over the last 53 years. And in the middle, the mid-range estimate is based on the average growth of historical spending over the last 10 years, 1999 to 2008, which is 5.2%. This growth rate is fairly representative of current pricing structures and financial costs. The estimated range in spending is 3.3 to 3.8 trillion over the next 20-year period. This forecast of spending is more than double what was actually spent over the last 53 years. Another way to look at this is to focus on the annual spending burden in 2028. In 2008, local government spent between $92 and $93 billion. The low-range forecast for 2028 is $189 billion. The mid-range is $284 billion. The high range is $421 billion. No matter how you slice it, this represents an enormous commitment of social resources to water and wastewater in America. So the mayors involved in the Water Council have been investigating both policies and practices that would help us achieve the required spending, regardless of which growth estimate turns out to be most accurate. I'd like to close my remarks by recognizing what has been adopted by the Conference of Mayors in its platform on water and wastewater services and infrastructure. To meet the public service needs and environmental stewardship responsibilities of current federal laws, cities need the following: a greater level of financial assistance from the federal government. Absolutely. Many cities will have to raise rates in order to meet the investment that is going to be required repeatedly over time. Congress needs to examine the current tax code and see if it can be changed to make it easier for cities to access private capital, such as public pension funds, to help finance these long-term capital investments. Finally, whether or not cities repeatedly raise rates, we will have to adopt smarter practices that are cost efficient. We are increasing the use of asset management programs. We are looking at regionalizing smaller systems to gain economies of scale. And mayors are looking at effective and efficient public-private partnership opportunities. And we'd be interested in hearing from any organization how their approach could demonstrate cost efficiencies and meet performance criteria through life cycle analysis. Rich and I had the opportunity here